away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus. Tender is the night, and haply the queen moon is on her throne, clustered round by all her starry fays. But here there is no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown, through verdurous blooms and winding mossy ways. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs, but in embalmed darkness guess each sweet, wherewith the seasonable month endows the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, where white hawthorn and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk rose, full of dew and wine, the murmurs haunt of flies on summer eves. Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now more than ever seems it rich to die, to cease upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a clod. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird. No hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the self-same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth, when sick for home she stood in tears amid the alien corn, the same that oft-time hath charmed magic casements opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairylands forlorn. Forlorn, the very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my soul's self. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, deceiving elf. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillsides. Now 'tis buried deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? I think that a lot more than we are aware of poetry, and perhaps of most arts, is based on some form of magical undertaking. When I say vision or the visionary poem, I'm like, in a way, I'm being quite literal. There's different ways that we get the poem. Some of them deliberate, some of them not deliberate, and some of the deliberate and some of the not deliberate ones are very, very like what we call evocation and what we call invocation in magic, and I'll talk about that maybe this time. I just wanted to start by, when I was thinking of this, I think I'll just start by reading what I wrote. So, one writes poetry. Nearly everyone writes poetry sometime in their lives. If you catch anybody at the right moment and talk to them, and ask them, not mockingly or not, but with some empathy. There's nobody that hasn't written poetry, I swear. There's nobody, either when they were young or when they were older or when they lost someone or when something happened or when they tried to figure something out or something. So nearly everyone has written poetry or will try it at some point. Some people write it often, and some people write it almost never, but they have given it a shot. One writes poetry for many reasons. Most often, we write poetry to tell someone something, to tell them especially how we feel. It's okay if I keep these here for later attempts at reading. We mostly want to tell people how we feel. And this is very interesting. For one thing, it's very, very hard say how you feel. It's really very hard to know how you feel. Right now, this minute, take a minute and see if you can tell yourself how you feel. See if you can feel out how you feel right now. You know, sometimes it's easier, like, to know what you're feeling, like somebody just ran over your pet dog, and you know how you feel that moment, but maybe you don't. You know, there might be more rage than grief, and you haven't even noticed that. And so, but it's hard to know how you feel, and then when you try to say how you feel, we haven't got a language for it. Anglo-Saxon, which is most of our common language, what we usually speak, are in our vernacular, we mostly are talking in Anglo-Saxon words and not Latin or Greek-based words. They didn't spend a lot of time making up they have a lot of words for plows, and a lot of words for oxen, a lot of words for knives and hatchets, but they don't really have a lot of words for feelings. And, you know, we all know that Greek has so many more words for love than we do, and so on and so forth. But to say how you feel, it helps to have some kind of vocabulary that allows you to say how you feel. So there's that. It's also, I wonder very much of why it's so important to me to let people know how I feel. What difference does it make? I'm going to feel something else in 10 minutes, probably. And if not 10 minutes, certainly 2 hours? I don't know. So it's really, really hard to say how you feel. It's hard to know how you feel. And to say it and know it and write it, and to write it well, that's a whole trip. And yet that's really, I'd say 90% of what people write about or write for when they write poetry. But you know, that's the hook. If you're going to be a poet, that's what draws you in, pulls you in, gets you started, but it's not where you wind up. I mean, at some point it slips away without you even noticing it. God, I haven't written a love poem in weeks, or months, or years, you say to yourself one day, but I'm still writing. Well, what am I writing about? And then you notice what you're writing about then, and it can be any number of things. You know, when I'm going back to my notes here. It's interesting that as a kid I was taught that language was what distinguished humans from other species. Boy, hubris in the 50s was amazing. If you've ever had a pet of any sort, or you've hung out where there were a lot of birds outside your window even, you know that we aren't the only people that talk. And the subtlety that some intelligent birds can get into a sentence, I was going to call it, I wonder what they call it, is beyond anything that I can get into a line of verse. So we know that that's ridiculous, that's total bullshit. Language does not distinguish humans from other species. It doesn't even distinguish, it's not only mammals that speak. We know that, I just mentioned birds, and I really would love to know how fish do it. We know how whales do it, but somehow a little maybe. But, so, then later I was also told that tools distinguish us from all other species. Only humans have tools. And then, you know, never mind that movie, what was it, 2001? 2000, whatever it was, where people are hammering on something, only they're not people, they're monkeys or something. Anyway, not only that, I mean, watch any kind of like smart critter that uses a stick to get a slug out from under a rock. That's a tool. All kinds of tools used by all kinds of critters, and not only mammals, and not only humans, and language. I mean, I was reading recently I was reading in some magazine in some doctor's office about bacteria. Bacteria have 2 languages each, at least that they know about. Each species they have a species-specific language that they talk to themselves with, but they have an Esperanto that they speak to all other kinds of bacteria with. So, hey, there's an elephant here to devour. It is spoken in a different language than what they just want their own small tribe to know. So, anyway, language. And all of that led me to one thing I wanted to say, which is you got to really watch out for all those things we were told, like language belongs to humans, or speech, or tools, or God knows what else. Europe is not a continent. Europe is this little peninsula that sticks off of Asia, and where everybody wound up who couldn't speak any of the languages in Asia. Because they were too subtle or too complicated or something. I was laughing, rolling on the floor laughing with my kids for half an hour over the idea that Europe is not a continent. What else have they told me? So, you gotta watch it. And then we'll get back to where I started. Why it's really, really interesting and important to look at why you want to say what you feel. And look at why you want to say what you feel on that level of the poem when you're writing to a person, like the love poem, or the "You really hurt my feelings last night" poem, or the "If I don't ever see you again, I'll die" poem, or "If I ever see you again, I'll die" poem, or all of those poems. But there's also the ones that we write about how we feel that we write for everyone, or what we think of as everyone. And that's an interesting thing. Who's our everyone? Who is in that group? And who's not? That's important. Who isn't part of that? And so when you go down to, okay, why do I want to tell people how I feel? It comes down to some generic word like loneliness. I'm lonely. I feel if I reach out to someone else who understands how I feel, I'll feel better. Well, maybe you'll feel better, maybe you won't. It's hard to know. Where do you end and the next thing begin? Like if you thought of consciousness for a second as a continuum, and it had a very, 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 very good, perfect part. Let's take that kind of Christian concept, all the way down to a very, 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 very bad, evil part. Which slice of that are you? Which slice of that becomes an angel or God talking to you? Which slice of that becomes the devil or some kind of evil force talking to you? So loneliness means you know where you end and where there's something else. And where is that? And when there's a something else, you also have some reason for wanting to be in touch with that something else. So there's a lot of stuff there to think about, just in that one thing. I remember when you're very little, you go through that period where you wonder whether, when I see red, do I see the same thing that somebody else is calling red when they see red? Did anybody here go through that? Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? It never gets answered, does it? I haven't found an answer. But after we go through that, okay, I wanna say how I feel. And then you start looking. There's a whole lot of other reasons for writing. That people are writing poetry. Lots and lots of reasons. I'll say a few, and then I'm going to take a minute and ask everybody to think about a few. I noticed the first poem I ever wrote, I wrote to remember. I wanted to write that. I wanted to remember that particular moment. In my poem, there's not a single thing about that moment. I was 7 years old. But when I read that poem, I remember that moment.
What's the moment?
I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just I was 7, It was a moment ask yourself that about what would you want to remember? What was the most important thing that you wanted to remember when?